This is the story of how a shitty movie made my life worse. So I was browsing YouTube, just watching whatever I found interesting, when I came across Jose Bird's review of Lady Ballers, a transphobic sports comedy produced by The Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro's culture war nonsense grift of a media company. I watched the review and I had a good ol' laugh at conservatives' failure to be funny. I didn't really think much more of it until Big Joel released his video on conservative comedy, and it also mentioned Lady Ballers. Huh, I thought. Maybe I should see this movie. Should be good to make fun of. And then I watched some more news videos on Ben Shapiro, and they dedicated an entire video solely to Lady Ballers, and my interest was piqued. I simply had to see this train wreck for myself. It was an obsession. I couldn't not see this movie. This was my first mistake. In 2012, Dan Shive, creator of webcomic Elgunis Shive, wrote a story arc where the main character Elliot gets a summer job working at a video rental store and is given access to movie reviews in order to help indecisive customers find movies to watch. At one point, he's confronted with a customer who wants to rent a movie with a 4% approval rating. Horrified, Elliot attempts to talk the customer out of renting the movie, but the customer, tired and cranky and unwelcoming to unsolicited opinions, rents the movie anyway. About 2 hours later, the customer returns the movie with a 1,000-yard stare and declares that he simply had to get it out of his dorm room and that he's going to go home and read. About a year later, real time, Dan made a callback to this moment when Elliot, now running a movie review YouTube channel, decides that he wants to know why it got such a low approval rating and watches the movie, then laments his hubris. This was the feeling evoked in me from watching Lady Ballers. Don't watch Lady Ballers. It's not fun, it's not funny, it's not even enjoyable to watch ironically. It's just 110 minutes of dull, joyless bigotry and stale boomer jokes. I think I laughed exactly once, and I can't even remember where. So clearly I had to make a video about it. It's the only way I can get the demons out. Also, oh my god, content warning, transphobia, misogyny, transmisogyny, racism, misogynoir, anti-Semitism, and homophobia. This is a vile movie made by horribly bigoted people, and there's a lot of upsetting stuff in here. So, let's get started, I guess. Oh god, I'm gonna have to watch it a second time to take notes, aren't I?
You've got to be number one!
Girls aren't as fast as boys. Or strong. Or is it athletic?
I won't tolerate any losers in this family. Your intensity is for shit! Win! Win! Win!
Based on gender.
Hey! So I decided that, in light of this movie's immeasurable artistic value, I wanted to give this synopsis the respect it deserves and film it in a setting commensurate with the movie's worth to society. Also, I was gonna do the movie review thing where you use a ton of movie footage over the review, but the Daily Wire is super gung-ho about copyright trolling anyone who talks about the movie in a critical light, so I'm gonna limit my presentation of any footage to when it's directly relevant, in the hopes that Ben Shapiro won't manifest in my mirror. So inasmuch as this movie is about anything, it's about Rob Gibson, a high school basketball coach played by Jeremy Boring, who, at the start of the movie, is about to lead his team to their third state championship in as many years, in the halcyon days of 2008. Weird year to be nostalgic for, given that was the year the economy collapsed. Unless it's just nostalgia for before Obama became president? That would track, given Boring's insistence that Obama ruined comedy. Anyway, we're introduced to the main cast in the locker room at halftime during the most important game of their lives, when Rob enters and accuses the team of playing like JV girls. I wonder if that'll be relevant. Felix is a towel boy who idolizes the team, even when they shove him into lockers. Jake and Blaine are twin half-brothers who are always fighting each other. David, we don't really get much from David. He's just kind of there. And Alex is empathetic, kind, wants to make his parents proud, and wants a bit more encouragement from his coach than just thrown chairs and insults. Felix calls Rob a god among men, and his response is to don shades and declare that yes, he is. Which is less funny when you learn that Jeremy Boring actually, in real life, refers to himself as the God King of the Daily Wire. Cut to 15 years in the future, where Rob attempts to give a similar pep talk to his students, who are all on their phones and ignoring him. Honestly, iconic behavior. He goes on about how the global games, obviously the Olympics, just let anybody try out these days, so isn't it worth it to try? And cut to all the students on their phones again. Anyway, he tells them not to steal his catalytic converter on their way out, and the one black student present tells him, "You can't talk to us like that," then drops a cordless reciprocating saw on the way out. So that's nice, and definitely not at all racist. Rob then gets fired over this, allegedly because you can't tell teenage boys not to steal, despite his boss explicitly telling him the problem was his racism. He's also told he's not allowed to teach students the Bible anymore, which, yeah, he's a coach at a rec center. Why would he be teaching kids the Bible? So he goes to pick up his daughter Winnie from school, and the teacher, who's waiting outside with Rob's daughter and is not pleased with him for being late, is wearing 4 masks. Honestly, queen shit. My personal theory is that she's doing it deliberately to troll him. Also, his car is giving off so many fumes that I'd wear a mask too. Even he and his daughter start coughing. He asks Winnie what she learned in school. She says she learned about the Cold War, and I don't need to finish this joke. You can guess every joke in this movie just from the premise. Also, Winnie owns him with an okay boomer, and it's actually really funny because, yeah, he just got wrecked by his 8-year-old. We meet Rob's ex-wife Darby and her liberal boyfriend Chris, played by self-described theocratic fascist Matt Walsh, and it's honestly baffling. Jeremy Boring clearly has no idea what liberals, or leftists for that matter, actually believe or what their lives are like, so he seems to fall back on hippies? This picture's of a hippie. But hey, Matt Walsh said the role made him uncomfortable because he had to hug other men, so I'll happily laugh at his fragile masculinity. The weird thing is, Chris doesn't do anything wrong. He's perfectly friendly towards Rob, calls him by his title of coach, asks him if he'd like to help him train for the Nashville runs. He's perfectly civil. Rob is just grossed out by him. Also, there's this weird line about how he loves mRNA vaccines. It's just weird culture war bullshit. Anyway, Rob just gets completely owned by Darby when he goes on a rant about how important winning is, and she just tells him that he should try it sometime. This isn't important. I just like that he just gets completely dunked on twice. First by his daughter and then by his ex-wife. So now out of work from the rec center, Rob ends up working at The Dollhouse, a restaurant where all the wait staff are drag queens? And who should Rob run into there but Alex? They reunite and bond over drinks and their shared shitty circumstances. Alex talks about how he tried to be an actor, Rob takes a jab at his sexuality for wanting to be an actor, and Alex laments that it's just so hard to succeed in Hollywood as a white male of non-exotic sexuality. Apropos of nothing, Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring both tried and failed to make it in Hollywood. The pair reminisce about when they were winners, and Alex mentions that he's still pretty fast, so they decide to enter Alex in the Nashville runs. Also, some guys see Alex running in the alley in drag and make a crack about how they're definitely homeschooling. This is a complete non sequitur, and only works if your thought process is, a guy in drag in the alley? This must be because of public school, gotta homeschool the kiddos. So they go to register Alex for the race, but the race organizer, who's wearing a jacket covered in trans flag pins that I really want, tells Rob the men's events are all full. He makes a scene and she tases him for some reason. Then Alex shows up, still wearing his wig from work, and the organizer mistakes him for a trans woman, freaks out that she tased an ally, and registers him in every single women's event at the heptathlon, very clearly panicking and trying to appease him? I think she's supposed to be afraid of being canceled. When Rob mentions how they solved this without getting social media involved, she just goes, please, I have a family. So I think that's what they're talking about, which is hilariously overblown. Anyway, Alex says he's not going to compete against women, and Rob claims that even a man past his prime like Alex is faster than a female athlete. Well, force feminizing him? I don't know what else to call it. He's literally stuffing the breast forms into his shirt. And then Rob says that high school boys can run faster than world record female sprinters. Delightful. But also put a pin in that. Either way, Rob is so obsessed with winning that he's perfectly willing to go against his own stated beliefs and pretend Alex is a trans woman if it means winning something. So Alex enters the race, and all the other athletes kind of just stare at him like, what the fuck? While he gives a grin of sheer delight. He wins not just the race, but every event, and gets the attention of Gwen Wild, an incredibly bluntly named amoral journalist who will do anything to advance her career. And because this movie was written by dipshits, it turns into a whole thing about how the news anchors desperately want to say that Alex is a man, but Gwen intimidates them into silence? I think? I guess it lines up with how conservatives love to scaremonger about being cancelled. So Rob is counting the money, and keeps the majority of it, and there's a crusty gag about Alex being sponsored by Bud Light, because right-wingers have an unhealthy obsession with Dylan Mulvaney. Also, Alex goes back to the dollhouse, despite the sponsorship and tournament winnings. And when Rob questions why, he responds that he doesn't completely hate it there. And also, he can't exactly live on $500 for long, he still needs to make money. Enter Gwen Wild. Gwen rolls up to the table, goes, "I know you're not a woman," throws up some shit about how she's a journalist and thus literally cannot be shamed, plus some bad jokes about menstruation, written by men who've heard liberal women complain about periods but don't actually have any compassion, then lays out her offer. She wants to gain clicks. Alex is a story in the making. If he competes in the qualifiers for the global games while pretending to be a woman, she'll spin it to hell and make them all a crap ton of money. Then she takes Rob home and femdoms him, bondage gear and tying him to the bed included? Because conservative men really, really want to fuck liberal women. There's some serious Madonna whore dichotomy shit going on with Gwen and Darby. Conservative women like Darby are portrayed as these sensible, desirable beacons of goodness, while liberal women like Gwen are portrayed as amoral, seductive temptresses who'll femdom you, then threaten to cancel you if you don't do as they say. It's sexist, it sucks. I don't have much more to say about it because Gwen's a straw man. Moving on. Alex and Rob decide to play basketball and get the gang back together. Fun! We spend far too long on Jake and Blaine's used car lot commercial, which is mostly just an excuse to put a bunch of women in bikinis and have them dance on camera. Anyway, Jake and Blaine have a whole combination shrine / love nest / martini bar dedicated to their basketball days, because all of them peaked in high school. Also, Alex is wearing a purse. It's called out and made fun of, despite being infinitely less cringy than the b-ball shrine, and he reacts defensively. Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which a storyteller gives an advance hint of what is to come later in the story. By the way, the Crane brothers can't act at all. Like, just putting it out there. Also, save for Alex and Felix, everyone on the basketball team is playing themselves. Like, Jake and Blaine Crane and David Cohn, not the MLB pitcher, all run a sports radio show at the Daily Wire, and here they're just playing characters named after themselves? It's weird. And cringy. So they go to track down David in deepest, darkest Michigan, and they find him living out in a cabin in the wilderness. He refuses to come back to the team, and everyone calls him fat for some reason, even though he's literally not. Then there's just the stupidest flashback sequence I've ever seen. It's cringy and bad and weird, and I don't know how to describe it other than Badger mascot humping trauma. Let me reiterate again, don't watch this movie, it's not worth it. It's bad and weird even outside of its politics, it's just not good. Also, David has the Badger mascot from his flashback tied up in his basement, like with a real human being inside. It's weird and fucked up, and I don't know what to do with this information that's never brought up again. He comes out of the cabin and agrees to rejoin the team, and I guess the Badger mascot guy just dies in that basement? They discuss who to recruit next, and look, I need to stop for a moment. There's a thing conservative comedians do where they imply things via juxtaposition. Like, they'll say one thing, then say something seemingly unrelated, and together they'll form the thing they actually want to say but can't because they know it won't fly with the normies. So they ask about Jamal, the one black guy who was on the team, because apparently this movie wasn't racist enough before, you've gotta name the one black guy Jamal. And they find out he's dead, killed by a space laser. Okay, weird. The next name is Moisha, who Jamal was always picking on, and is revealed to have been a Mossad agent, even in high school. Did you catch the reference? It's not fucking subtle. And then they segue into an ad. Not product placement, an actual ad in their feature-length film. Like it's a YouTube video or something. Cringe. There's no other word for it. This makes me cringe. It's embarrassing. Anyway, apparently that's everyone, so they go with Felix, the towel boy they were bullying at the beginning of the movie, and he turns out to be rich now. So they visit his mansion, and he's not only immediately in, but he is tripping over himself to be liked by the rest of the team, despite the abuse he suffered at their hands in high school. Because, you know, someone they bullied can't have developed his own life and grown past his abuse. He has to still be obsessed with his abusers and eager to please them, even as a wealthy adult. He's happy nothing's changed in their relationship, even though his life changed for the better in every conceivable way once he got out of high school and away from his bullies. Ugh, I need a fucking drink. So Gwen shows up, and she and Rob fill the team in on the plan. Also, Gwen laughs derisively at Rob calling her his girlfriend, then tells Darby to get her hands off her boyfriend the moment she shows up. This is a movie that considers women to be multifaceted, complex individuals who contain multitudes. Anyway, then Winnie educates them all about what her teacher taught her about gender theory. And it's all a weird funhouse mirror distortion of a conservative's idea of what might potentially be taught about gender theory based on buzzwords they saw on social media and don't understand. And then there's a joke about how Winnie doesn't know what sex is because she's 8. And wow, that sure would be a great joke about how kids are taught advanced queer theory before they're old enough to know what sex is. If that happened, realistically speaking, an 8-year-old might learn some basic terms if they had a queer classmate, enough to treat that classmate with respect. But it's not like they're sitting kids down and going, welcome to grade 3, your curriculum consists of Judith Butler and Julia Serrano. That's a conservative fever dream. Also, genocidal fascist Michael Knowles makes a racist joke about being 1/2048th Dakota, and Brett Cooper makes a racist joke about slave names. Fun times. Finally, nearly an hour in, we're out on the basketball court. Out the Lady Ballers go in their terrible wigs, pretending to be trans women, to an empty stadium. Why? Because
It's ladies basketball, boys. Nobody watches.
the coach of the opposing team tries to protest that the Lady Ballers aren't women, and oh fun, it's Ben Shapiro! I do have to admire his dedication wearing his kippah in every single production he's involved in, though. And by admire, I mean cringe, because Ben Shapiro is a shanda for the goyim. Anyway, he gets the game going, and the Lady Ballers win with ease. The Lady Ballers winning attracts attention, clout, and absolutely none of the negativity and gatekeeping that trans athletes actually face, but David notices that the Hawkettes, the hilariously on-the-nose women's basketball team they just faced, seriously, they'd just be called the Hawks, are upset, and he confronts the coach about it. Gwen shows up, gets called a monster for having gotten an abortion, and then David gets a sponsorship and stops giving a shit about his moral hang-ups. This is twice now that David started to have an arc, and then whatever it is that was going on with him is just forgotten about. First it was the Badgers, which returned for a brick joke and then never come up again. Now it's his guilt about cheating at sports, which is immediately assuaged by getting sponsored. Between that and his non-essence at the start of the movie, it feels like he's just kind of there. His presence doesn't add anything to the story. He doesn't go through any kind of arc. He just exists. So the Lady Ballers keep winning. There's a transphobic joke about the Crane brothers in women's changing rooms, and then more making fun of Dylan Mulvaney because they really can't let it go that Budweiser sponsored a trans woman. I think the worst part of this film is how cynical it all is. None of the liberals portrayed in the movie actually believe in trans rights. They're just afraid of being called bigoted. It's kind of deeply revealing about how conservatives think that everyone agrees with them, but are too scared of being cancelled to say it. According to Rob Altemeyer in a study on authoritarianism, authoritarians want above all to be normal, and therefore for the people they hate to be othered, because if the people they hate are normalized, then it is no longer socially acceptable for them to aggress. So they tie themselves in knots to convince themselves that everyone else secretly agrees with them, but must just be too afraid to say it. Anyway, the Lady Ballers start slacking off, enjoying their newfound fame, and Rob gets worried because he's still in this to win. The Lady Ballers barely win the semifinals as a result of the aforementioned slacking off, and Ted Cruz shows up for a cameo. The less said about this, the better. He doesn't even say anything funny. There's a scene between Rob and Winnie that I'll talk about in more detail later, but by the end of it, Rob's realized that what he's doing is a mistake, and Darby has realized that Rob's actually a good man. By this movie's standards, not mine. However, when Rob goes home, he finds that Gwen has broken into his apartment. She wants him to uphold his end of the deal, or else. Because, you know, she's an amoral journalist, and the Lady Ballers almost lost, and she overheard his whole speech in the previous scene. And then Gwen, who's supposed to be a liberal, goes on a rant about the evils of divorce? It's weird and out of character and came from nowhere, and then she goes on a second unhinged rant about transhumanist tech oligarchs and nihilist college professors, and it's just as bizarre and jarring as it sounds. She tells Rob that he has to win, or else she'll cancel him. Dun dun dun. Also, more racist jokes from Michael and Brett, dressed in horrifically offensive caricatures of black and indigenous people that I'm not going to show on screen, but would make Caitlin Bennett green with envy. This movie has a very specific audience, in case that wasn't clear. And because the movie needs more racism, apparently, as the final match arrives, the Lady Ballers meet their nemesis, a team of big, scary black men running the same scheme as they are. This whole thing is just so racist. I can't. So the Lady Ballers get their asses kicked, there's some more shitty jokes. The one actual female athlete with a name comes back solely to tell Blaine and Jake that she's pregnant with their children, and then disappears. It's a mess. But then Rob gets a text that Winnie's found the Lady Ballers merch booth and that Rob's his daughter's hero. So Rob tells the Lady Ballers that they've taken the scheme as far as they can. They're all going to forfeit because they don't want to erase women from women's sports. So it's time for them to man up and do the right thing when they're already losing, and doing the right thing costs them nothing. Also, Gwen tries to snipe Rob, like with an actual sniper rifle, and he only survives by seeing a lucky penny and leaning over to pick it up. That's not important, but it was important to me personally that you all knew that. As for the ending of the movie, well, I'll talk about it more in depth later, but suffice to say, the Lady Ballers don't end up winning. Gwen calls Rob a winner, everyone goes back to their lives, Rob gets back with Darby, and Chris, the liberal played by Matt Walsh, is revealed to secretly be Matt Walsh, playing himself. Candace Owens shows up, Matt Walsh gives us a horrific approximation of human laughter, and the train wreck finally ends. Also, Jordan Peterson shows up in the post-credit scene, but doesn't say anything. Fuck my life! I can't believe I watched this a second time to write all that. By the way, shout out to the teacher still wearing a mask even at the end of the movie. The unsung hero of the story. Okay, after spending so long in Jeremy Boringland, I needed to touch some fucking grass. So I brought the conversation out here. I'm gonna be honest, there's not that much to actually talk about here in terms of transphobia. Like, there's no veiled implication on the transphobia front. This movie is upfront about hating trans people. It makes no bones about how much it hates trans people. Hating trans people is the central theme of the whole movie. Like, the movie doesn't work if you understand literally anything about trans people. And personally, I don't want this video to just be pointing at ignorant depictions and going, no, that's not how that works, because that's very boring and extremely depressing. But also, look, it's like PragerU, okay? You can't debate the transphobia and Lady Ballers without accepting the frame the movie's presenting. Because sure, I could talk about how Ben Shapiro wanted to make this a documentary, but couldn't, because you cannot, in fact, just throw on a dino wig and sign up for women's sports. But if I'm being honest, I feel like some of the arguments made to fight against this kind of transphobia kind of veer towards transmedicalism. Like, yeah, Ben can't just throw on a wig and play women's sports. That's obvious. But the gatekeeping towards trans women in women's sports is a bad thing. I don't really like the idea of presenting trans gatekeeping as a good, normal thing, as a counter-argument to transphobia. Isn't that just telling the transphobes, look, the thing you want to happen is actually happening, so stop making a fuss, without acknowledging that those things shouldn't be happening? Because actually, trans women in women's sports are a good thing, and gatekeeping trans women to require some level of hormones or muscle loss in order to compete is in itself transphobic. Plus, you know, focusing on hormones and muscle loss completely ignores non-binary athletes, and also ignores the fact that the results of transition would look different depending on if you transitioned before or after natal puberty, and, like, do you see what I mean? By arguing against Lady Baller's transphobia, you kind of have to back yourself into a, no, it's not that easy stance. That's either the weak position of transphobes are factually incorrect on the difficulty of existing as a trans woman, or else the transmedicalist position of, no, things are gatekept and that's a good thing. Like, can I be honest? I would love for it to be that easy. Not in the specific way that Lady Ballers presents it, because there's a whole bunch of other problems with the movie too. But like, no, actually. It was not a good thing that I had to be on a waiting list for a year to get on estrogen. It didn't give me time to make sure, it just made me hate myself for a year. And no, it's not a good thing for trans people to be gatekept from sports. Sports are a part of society, and we have a right to participate in society as the gender we are. So no, I don't really want to get into the film's ignorance towards trans people. The points it's making are so bad, so unhinged and detached from trans reality, that arguing against them at all would require me to take a position that's contrary to what I actually believe. But here's the thing. For as transphobic as this movie is, the problems with Lady Ballers run far deeper. So buckle in, because we need to talk about misogyny. See, this movie gets attacked for being transphobic, and rightly so, but the transphobia isn't the foundational bigotry of the movie. Lady Baller's transphobia is like a rotten floorboard. You tear it out to replace it, only to find a metric ton of mold underneath. If you just replace the floorboard, but don't also get rid of the mold, then you're just gonna be replacing the floorboard again in 6 months. And for Lady Ballers, the mold is misogyny. And I don't just mean hatred of trans women, I mean capital M misogyny. This movie hates women, period. I already talked about Gwen and the Madonna-whore dichotomy between her and Rob's ex-wife, but nowhere is this more apparent than in how Lady Ballers talks about women's sports and female athletes. See, the entire concept of Lady Ballers, the entire point of the thing, hinges on a single axiom that the movie presents us with over and over and over. and it's the viewpoint of the villain from She's the Man.
Girls aren't as fast as boys.
What?
Or strong. Or as athletic. Hey, this is not me talking. It's a scientific fact. Girls can't beat boys. It's as simple as that.
High school boys can run faster than world record female sprinters.
Like, this is just retrograde misogyny, right? This is the shit we were discounting as sexist back in the early 2000s. The first time we see Alex enter a race, he's up against 5 cis women, and he trounces them all with ease. Like, it's almost funny how exaggeratedly ahead of them he is. Almost. So there's our first brush against women athletes, and they're portrayed as having no chance against Alex. But alright, that's once, and it's a contrivance to set up the actual plot. So when the Lady Ballers go to their first qualifier match, well, first they have to get in a jab about how nobody watches women's sports, that's so stale it's being used as a brick, so fuck you. But then they face off against a professional women's basketball team, and they win with ease. Like, these schlubby dudes who haven't played basketball since high school go up against a professional team of female athletes, and don't just win, they don't even have to try. This is sexist, right? It's not just me. David expresses some reservations about what they're doing, but it's because, and I quote,
"Aren't we just using our innate strength and speed to wail on a bunch of girls in a competition where we wouldn't stand a chance against other men?"
a bunch of girls, not women, definitely not a team of professional athletes, a bunch of girls. Thanks, David. Not only are the matches against the other teams easy, but the cinematography makes specific note to have the women athletes' faces make direct contact with the Lady Ballers' crotches. It's so on the nose it's insulting. Here are a bunch of girls, and they're getting their asses kicked by the masculine energy of a group of men. They then show a montage of the Lady Ballers branching out into other women's sports and winning with ease in all of them. I'm not losing my mind, right? This is sexism, isn't it? I feel like I'm losing touch with reality. I need to go touch more grass. I also want to give a special shout out to when Rob is giving a Puff interview to Gwen, and she asks him what he'd say to people who say that women could never compete in men's sports, and his response is to make a jab about Caitlyn Jenner, conveniently sidestepping the actual question. Anyway, the next day, Rob is approached by Winnie, who tells him, in all honesty, that she wants to be a boy, because she wants to be a winner like him. He asks her why she thinks she has to be a boy to be a winner, and she says that boys are better at everything. In a different film, made by different people, this would be where Rob has a revelation about how his attitude towards women has been affecting his daughter, and tells Winnie that she doesn't need to be a boy to be a winner, that girls can be just as good at sports as boys. But it's Lady Ballers, and so when Rob says that it's not true that boys are better at everything, we're treated to this.
They're better at basketball
Okay, yeah, basketball.
and swimming,
Okay.
MMA,
That goes without saying.
and running, and javelin, powerlifting, shot put, hockey, karate, football, pole vault, driving, parking, most of the STEM fields, rock and roll, opening pickle jars!
Okay.
And I just need to pause here to point out that Winnie's supposed to be like a little wokelet. Like, in the logic of the film, she's supposed to have picked up all these woke ideas from public school and from Chris, yet here she is spouting this misogynistic rant about how boys are better at STEM and parking. If an 8-year-old family member of mine went on this rant, I'd be asking them who told them all that crap. But not Rob, because you see, Rob actually agrees with this rant. He agrees that boys are better at all that stuff. He just tells Winnie that it doesn't matter, because girls can't become boys, and that there's all sorts of stuff that girls are better at, like being wives and mothers and giving birth. I can't. I just can't. Oh, hey, Winnie, what's wrong? Oh, what's that? You want to be a boy because you feel like boys are better at the things you're interested in? Sorry, but you can never be a boy, and boys will always be better than you at the things you like, and you'll never ever be able to beat them because you're a girl. But don't be sad. You can go be a housewife instead of doing the things you like doing. And don't forget, no matter what, you'll never be valued for anything more than your capacity to breathe. Fuck this movie. Anyway, after the Lady Ballers get their asses kicked by racist stereotypes, and Rob gives the most gut-wrenchingly transphobic speech in the movie, the Lady Ballers decide to bow out, and cede the qualifiers to... Oh, what's that? You were expecting some professional female athletes? Nah. They're letting Winnie and her prepubescent friends play, and the other team lift them onto their shoulders so they can make baskets. It's so fucking patronizing, and kind of just reveals what the movies thought of women's sports all along. It's just a bunch of girls playing at being athletes, and the right thing to do is let them pretend they're capable so they feel good about themselves, because they'll never be as good as the real athletes, schlubby, out-of-practice men. And if you were to be the kind of dipshit who looks at women's sports from this perspective, then all of a sudden, the panic over trans women in sports kinda makes sense if you squint. Like, women's sports, in their view, is a playground. It's the playground where the women go to pretend to be athletes while the men are off doing the real athletics. So if you're the kind of dipshit who believes that, and also the kind of dipshit who believes trans women are just men, then trans women in sports kinda looks like an adult going to beat the kiddies at sports because he can't win against actual adults. But here's the thing. This only makes sense if you believe, 1, that trans women aren't women, and 2, that women aren't, and indeed can never be, as good at sports as men. I have no energy or interest in going into gender semantics to dispute point 1. There's about 1,000,001 trans YouTubers who've done it. It's been done to death. Trying to prove that I'm the gender I say I am is a humiliating and degrading exercise in futility. But I do want to talk about point 2, because if this...
Men are faster, stronger, meaner. The entire reason we created women's sports was to keep you out.
...is what they believe women's sports is for, and they're wrong, then why does women's sports exist? So look, I could just say trans women belong in women's sports because trans women are women. In fact, I did do that earlier. But that's going to require you to already believe that trans women are women. And again, I have no interest in proving that today. Plus, if I just leave it at that, a bunch of cisgender liberals are gonna be superficially supportive and wave our flags all over their brands and be super fucking obnoxious about it, but as they sit in bed, a tiny demonic Dennis Prager will sit on their shoulders, whispering, "But what about men in women's sports?" And years later, when their cis daughters lose to a trans girl at a high school track and field meet, all of that superficial support is gonna vanish in a puff of smoke. So, for now, let's set trans people aside and talk about cis men facing cis women in sports. And to do that, let's take a quick look at the history of women's sports. Because the thing is, the truth is the exact opposite of what Lady Ballers proclaims. In 1902, Madge Syers, the first woman to compete at the Ice Skating World Championships, took home a silver medal, beating 2 men in the process. The very next year, in response to Syers' win, the International Skating Union changed the rules and introduced separate championships for men and women. In 1926, Gertrude Ederl became the first woman to swim the English Channel, with a total time of 14 hours and 30 minutes, beating the men's records by over 2 hours. The year before, Ederl also swam from the tip of Manhattan to Sandy Hook, New Jersey in 7 hours and 11 minutes, once again beating the men's record. In 1931, baseball player Jackie Mitchell, pitching for the Chattanooga Lookouts in an exhibition match against the New York Yankees, struck out both Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig back-to-back. Ruth allegedly hurled verbal abuse at the umpire after being struck out and had to be led away back to the bench by his teammates, quoted after the match in a Chattanooga newspaper as saying,
"I don't know what's going to happen if they begin to let women in baseball. Of course, they'll never make good. Why? Because they're too delicate. It would kill them to play ball every day."
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? In 1967, Beryl Burton broke the 12-hour time trial record in cycling for both women and men, reaching 277.25 miles. And of course, in 1973, Billie Jean King famously beat former #1 professional tennis player Bobby Riggs. Riggs had beaten Margaret Court earlier in the year and had offered a taunt towards all female tennis players, claiming exactly what Lady Ballers claims, that women aren't as good at sports as men. Billie Jean King took up the challenge, faced off against Bobby Riggs, and kicked his ass in all 3 sets. And yes, Riggs was past his prime, Martina, but up. He was the one who declared that he could beat any female tennis player, even past his prime. And yet, here's the thing. When Syers excelled, the response was to force her out. Following her victory, she was segregated into a women's league that wouldn't even see an actual event until 1906, 4 years later. Their reasoning for barring women from the event? That 1, ankle-length dresses prevent the judges from seeing a female contestant's feet, which really sounds like the solution is just to wear a shorter dress. 2, a judge's neutrality may be impacted by his attraction to a female contestant, which, like, come on, dudes, get over yourselves. And 3, direct quote, it is difficult to compare women with men. After Jackie Mitchell struck out Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, MLB Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis voided her contract, declaring that women were unfit to play baseball as it was too strenuous. In 1952, MLB formally banned the signing of women to contracts, a ban that wouldn't be lifted until 1992. So just looking at history, we can see a pretty simple reason for women's sports to exist, and it's the same reason any minoritized group makes their own leagues. It's because they're pushed out of the mainstream, either by being outright banned or by informal barriers. If your choices are between playing in an all-women league or not playing the game at all, then yeah, that's a good reason to make a women's league. But that's not a question of biology. That's a question of social justice. There are plenty of social reasons feminists could and do argue for women-only sports. I don't want to argue against feminist reasons for women's sports, in part because they're out of scope, but ultimately because I basically agree with the idea of affinity groups. The problem is that those feminist reasons for having women's sports groups aren't why the courts are upholding their existence. Most of the court cases regarding sports integration today are explicitly about trans people, because of fucking course they are. But if we go back to the early 2010s and look more closely, most of the court decisions barring men from playing on women's teams, well, it's mostly high school boys playing on girls' teams, actually, and it's mostly in scenarios where there is no boys' team for the specific sport, so the options are play on the girls' team or don't play at all, tend to fall back on this same idea that women are just worse at sports than men. So while I'm all for feminist affinity groups hosting women's sports as a form of consciousness raising and solidarity building, I don't think mainstream women's sports leagues and teams actually fulfill that purpose in general. They're just used to reinforce women's perceived inferiority in sport. So why do so many people think women perform poorly compared to men? Well, first and foremost, it's not a concrete rule. Not only do we have all the historical examples I just mentioned, but we also have more recent examples, such as bowler Kelly Kulick winning the 2010 PBA Tournament of Champions, and Eddie Yoshida pitching for men's baseball teams in both the US and Japan since 2008. In high school sports, we have wrestlers Michaela Hutchison and Hope Stephenson winning the Alaskan Boys State Wrestling 103-pound title in 2006 and 2010, respectively. Tennis player Annie Houghton winning the 2006 West Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic League's boys singles title 6-0 and 6-1. And California quarterback Miranda McOsker scoring 3 touchdowns on a boys team in 2005. I could go on, but I think you get the picture. The rule that women aren't as good at sports as men has so many exceptions it's starting to look like Swiss cheese. What we should instead be analyzing here is a general trend of men outperforming women and asking why that is without resorting to sexist assumptions about inherent inferiority. So let's talk about girl push-ups. This is a push-up. It exercises the pecs, triceps, and deltoids. It's a basic athletic exercise, and you already know what a fucking push-up is. Why am I explaining this? During a push-up, an athlete is supporting 69% of their body mass, nice, on their hands while up, and 75% of it while down. This is a knee push-up, commonly known as a girl push-up by sexist gym teachers. It's significantly less difficult and much less intensive. While up, the athlete is supporting only 53% of their body mass on their hands and only 61% while down. Most people who start their exercise journey by doing knee push-ups never progress to a full push-up. And yet, even in 2024, the American College of Sports Medicine uses knee push-ups to assess women's upper body strength, while men are assessed with the full push-up. Melanie Adams, a professor of exercise science at Keene State College in New Hampshire, did a study of female college students in 2022 that found that most female students could do normal push-ups just fine, and that some could do more than 20 without stopping, which I can't fucking do. Or can I? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Fuck. Nope, can't do it. I was right. Fuck. Adams mentioned that some of the students she studied actually surprised themselves when they did the full push-ups, averaging about 9 of them. She talked about how they blossomed when they realized how strong they could be. And honestly, it makes me kind of sad that they thought so poorly of their own strength to begin with. A lot of girls in gym class and schools are told to do knee push-ups and other similarly lesser forms of exercise out of this existing belief in women's weakness, with the result being that they don't get as good a workout as the boys. Compound that with things like boys on co-ed sports teams not passing the ball to girls, or men in martial arts dojos refusing to go all out against female combatants in sparring, and then let it play out on a long enough time frame, and you start to see the naturalization of the belief.
The belief in innate, inevitable, natural female weakness relative to male strength can be seen to underlie the forms of segregation emerging within integrated training settings. Putting these beliefs into practice, for instance, when instructors ask women to do lighter forms of exercise, or men withhold from sparring at a required intensity with female partners, represents the need to remain accountable to codes of propriety surrounding dominant modes of gender. Such behavior actually helps to reinforce these ideas and, extrapolated over time, writes this gender logic into the bodies of practitioners. These then exert a naturalizing effect, working as a self-fulfilling prophecy as gender is done in ways that encourage men to become stronger, tougher, and better at fighting, but leave women behind.
There are so many more men in sports than women, because women are discouraged and barred in 100 subtle ways, and that has a filtering effect. Women athletes are paid an order of magnitude less than men. Women's sports are chronically underfunded and seen as less prestigious. Some sports even have completely different, more lenient rules for women's leagues, and without the chance to test themselves against more skilled opponents, women athletes end up left behind. If a guy has to face 10,000 guys to make the team, you can bet he's gonna be pretty damn good at what he does. If a woman gets on the team just for showing up because nobody else did, or she only has to face 10 people to make the team, who knows what level of skill she's gonna be at. None of this is because of biology. It's because of misogyny. And yes, there are obviously biological differences between most cis men and most cis women. But here's the thing. First off, how many of those differences are actually relevant? Like, despite what people in the early 1900s believed, the existence of a uterus inside a woman doesn't impact her athletic ability. And second, we're not starting from a tabula rasa here. We don't have a control group of women athletes whose lives haven't been shaped by misogyny to compare against. It's not really possible for us to know 100% whether these differences are innate, like Lady Ballers claims, or if they're due to naturalized misogyny. Like, I can't prove beyond a shadow of doubt that removing misogynistic barriers will result in a total parity between cis men and cis women in sports. We'd have to, actually remove systemic barriers and see what happens. But, like, even if we did do that, would we then put those barriers back if there wasn't total parity? Removing misogynistic barriers against women in sports is just an unadulterated good. I referenced She's the Man earlier as a counter to Lady Ballers, and while it's obviously not a scientific study, it's a movie, neither is Lady Ballers. And so I want to point out a few specific moments in She's the Man. When Viola, disguised as her brother Sebastian, first tries out for the boys' soccer team, she only makes second string, and she's pretty upset about it. However, after she makes a rom-com deal with her roommate Duke, where he'll train her in exchange for helping him ask out a girl he likes, she starts practicing with the boys' team, and she takes to the more intense exercises like a duck to water, ultimately delivering the winning goal in the championship match against her asshole ex-boyfriend. Now, obviously, Duke didn't know she was a girl, but by subjecting her to the same intense practice the boys engage with regularly, she's able to become a better soccer player and keep up with them. The problem wasn't biological differences. It was that she didn't have the training she needed, and once she got it, she could hold her own.
We don't discriminate based on gender.
So, no. Ultimately, this belief that the concept of women's sports needs to be protected from scary men falls apart even if you don't believe that trans women are women, because it's still viewing women as inherently frail, lesser beings who are biologically determined to be inferior to men. And if that's not misogynist, I don't know what is.
What do we have then that we don't have now?
Practice.
Youth, a black guy on the team.
So I alluded to this a few times in the synopsis, but this movie is also really fucking racist. It makes jokes about black youth being thieves, features offensive caricatures worn by white people who are allegedly making jokes about white liberals, but clearly jumped at the chance to dress like stereotypes of black and indigenous people, and of course, the final game has the Lady Ballers square off against a bigger, blacker team and instantly start to lose. There's an old racist stereotype associating black people with aggressive, animalistic hypermasculinity, and it's on full display here, right down to a joke about black guys having bigger dicks. The whole movie is suffused with a fear of blackness, especially in relation to sports and other physical activity. Obviously, all of these claims about black people in sport are nonsense. The exact same stereotypes surrounding black people in basketball now were perpetuated about Jewish basketball players in the urban shtetl period between the 1920s and the 1950s. But like all racist ideas, the impact they have on people's lives are all too real. I also need to add a massive caveat to my own arguments from earlier, because this misogynist idea of women being frail and delicate and incapable of physical activity, that's historically been a white people thing. Blackness is overwhelmingly gendered as masculine, and black women are constantly stereotyped as indestructible, invulnerable, and masculine. When black women compete in women's sports, they face defeminization and a presumption that they've got some sort of natural advantage over white athletes. Take Caster Semenya as a case study. Content warning. Caster Semenya is a South African middle-distance Olympic runner, but after winning the 800 meters at the 2009 Track and Field World Championships, she was publicly accused of being, guess what, not really a woman. She was forced to undergo humiliating and degrading sex testing before being cleared to return to the sport and going on to win the gold in the 2016 Rio Olympics. In 2019, World Athletics, formerly the IAAF, introduced new rules preventing athletes like Semenya from participating in women's track and field, specifically in the division Semenya was active in, unless they take anti-androgens. And just last year, World Athletics made those rules even more stringent, requiring an even lower T level to be allowed to compete. Caster Semenya does have an intersex condition, though she rejects the label of intersex, so I'm not going to call her that, and does have higher T levels than a perisex cis woman. But this wasn't public information at the time, and she herself only found out through the IAAF sex testing. Complaints from her competitors weren't solely about the margin of her victory, but about her appearance, masculinizing her, misgendering her, and claiming things like, "These kinds of people should not run with us. For me, she is not a woman, she is a man." Direct quote from Italian runner Elisa Kuzma, who came in 6th against Semenya. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
By the 2016 Rio Olympics, Semenya was able to run as herself and handedly won gold, prompting another round of debates and unleashing a storm of negative comments from fellow competitors. Besides the absurdity that women must change their bodies, whether through medication or surgery, to compete in sport, it is difficult to ignore the fact that the most recent allegations of women being men have fallen on black and brown bodies from the global south. Dutee Chand and Santi Soundararajan are notable here. Because these bodies do not fit the white ideal of body type, limited musculature and athleticism, size, petite, and high voices, they are immediately rendered suspect and indeed criminalized. Although it is difficult for all women to be taken as serious athletes, it becomes almost impossible for black women to present themselves in even the limited ways that white women have access to.
Hi, Future Chaya here. It's currently August 4th, it's like 8 in the morning, and it literally happened again 3 days ago. So Iman Khalif, a cisgender welterweight boxer from Algeria who competed in the 2024 Paris Olympics, has been facing massive amounts of degendering and masculinization, including from noted TERF J.K. Rowling, claiming that she's secretly a man in disguise and that it was unfair for her to fight Italian boxer Angela Carini, whom she defeated in 2 blows. The IOC and the Paris boxing unit backed Khalif up and confirmed that she's eligible to compete, but the IBA, the notoriously corrupt organization that started the gender claims about Khalif in the first place, is paying out $50,000 to Carini, who has a history of throwing matches. This shit is still happening, and it's honestly just a perfect demonstration of how trans misogyny intersects with racism to hurt anyone who isn't a cisgender feminine white woman.
The racism in Lady Ballers, while primarily directed at black men in the film itself, which actually does feature some black women in the group of female athletes the Lady Ballers annihilate, diversity win! Misogynist movie thinks black women are as bad at sports as white women, isn't separate from its transphobia or misogyny. It's another limb of the same rotted tree. The patriarchal image of what a woman should be is one that only includes cisgender, feminine white women. Black women are masculinized and excluded, and trans women are masculinized and excluded. Misogyny intersects with anti-black racism to produce misogynoir, and it intersects with transphobia to produce transmisogyny, and black trans women get the worst of all 3 intersections, and it's all bound up in the same worldview. If we forget that and only focus on the specific form of misogyny that cis white women face, we're doing an injustice to countless women who face differing forms of oppression. So here's the thing about this movie. It's racist, misogynistic, and transphobic, sure. But there's also a weird reluctance to actually depict trans people. Almost all the transphobic jabs are directed at cis allies, or else portraying the very idea of transness as absurd. But there's one exception. Alex. Alex is the first lady baller, the first basketball player Rob recruits, and the one most invested in the scheme. From the very beginning, Alex is portrayed as kinder, more empathetic than the other characters. He doesn't pick on Felix in the locker room. When everyone else is calling David fat as they leave the hut in the woods, he just says that he misses him. Honestly, Alex's actor is the only one to charge any emotion whatsoever into his scenes. And for the record, that is damning Daniel Considine with faint praise. He's still not good, but the bar's in the mud, and he made me feel something, so nice work? When the lady ballers dive headfirst into pretending to be trans women, Alex is the only one who makes a genuine effort to... I don't want to say pass, but like, he's into it, is what I'm saying. Where the others are cynically milking the prestige of being perceived as trans... God, I hate this movie. Alex talks about how he'd never known himself until now, and how he feels seen for the first time. When Rob, outside of the public eye and speaking in confidence, asks him about the waterworks, Alex simply replies that he meant every word. Finally, in the climax of the film, right after Rob tells the lady ballers that the scheme is over, Alex asks to speak with Rob in confidence and tells him that she is a woman. Alex is trans. If this were a different movie, made by different people, this would be the climactic moment of Alex's character arc. She's gone through a journey of self-discovery and come out the other side feeling proud of herself, happy with who she is. She talks about how she never felt like herself playing basketball in high school, nor during her decade in Hollywood. But once she started wearing affirming clothing at the drag club, then playing with the lady ballers, she felt something. That spark that builds in trans people when we see ourselves for the first time. The spark that, if properly taken care of, builds into a fire that gives us the courage to remake ourselves, to cross the narrow bridge that leads to our true selves, and live an authentic life, content in who we are, loving ourselves and becoming whole. And Rob, who has known Alex for over 15 years, who has been Alex's coach, friend, and confidant, tells her no.
You're confused. I get that. We all get confused sometime. And if you need help, buddy, I'm gonna help you get it. But you gotta believe me when I tell you this. You are not a woman. You're just a lost man in a lost world with shitty parents and a real shitty coach who've all gone along with this lie instead of just hurting your feelings and telling you the truth.
How can you be so sure I'm not a woman?
Everything else has been culture war garbage, racist jabs, and stale conservative talking points. But this is what the film, when confronted with an actual trans woman expressing her authentic self, actually thinks of trans people. We're delusional, confused, lost, in need of help. And everyone's lying and enabling this delusion to try to spare our feelings. And what we really need is for someone to man up and tell us the hard truth. If I can be candid, this is the part of the film that hurt me to watch. Not because it was offensive, although it was. Not because it's transphobic, although it is. Not even because it's cruel, although it absolutely is. But because this, right here, is what, in my lowest moments, I believe about myself. Queer-affirming media is always presenting us as confident in our identity. Liberal allies present us as having always known and never having any doubt about ourselves. It's the version of trans femininity that I wish was the case for me, but the idea of transitioning scared the living daylights out of me. I would hole up in my room, isolating myself from the outside world, just wishing I could be happy as a man. After I came out to my parents, there would be times the dysphoria got so bad, I found myself genuinely unable to speak. I was having crises nearly every weekend, when keeping Shabbat also kept me isolated from my trans-affirming online communities who could reassure me. And yeah, in that year I spent on that waiting list, I wondered if I was actually just delusional, if I was making up some reason to feel sorry for myself. I second-guessed every urge that led me to seek transition. It got so bad that I couldn't go out on my apartment balcony alone because I would find myself just staring at the ground 14 stories down and imagining until I forced myself to go back inside. I was miserable. I didn't need someone like Rob to tell me I was deluded. My own brain was doing a perfectly good job of saying it to myself. That's the Ouroboros of dysphoria and self-hatred. You're fighting an enemy whose primary weapon is convincing you that it doesn't exist, that what you're really fighting against is reality itself. And every Rob Gibson, every Ben Shapiro, every Matt Walsh just gives it more ammunition. In her video on incels, ContraPoints named this enemy masochistic epistemology. Whatever hurts most is true. Fuck. But then I started estrogen, and it was like the sun breaking through a cloud. All of those thoughts melted away, leaving just happiness. A kind of happiness that I didn't think possible. I have certainty now that I am trans. And it's not like estrogen made me a woman or anything silly like that. I was already a woman and trans, whether I underwent HRT or not. What estrogen did was make me a happy, healthy, alive woman. And when I hear that slithering, twisting voice hissing in my ear, but what if you're not really trans? What if the TERFs are right and you're just a delusional, autogynephilic man with a fetish? I can see it for the puny, unworthy self-hatred it always was. It's no hyperbole to say that transitioning saved my life. And watching this movie made my life just so much worse. Why did I do that?